Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. Follow the link in the description to pre-order a copy of the book so you'll be the first to receive it on the date of September 1st, 2022. The Outdoor Minimalist Podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. In episode 20 of the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast, we will be discussing conservation and how that applies to our hiking trails. Before we get into the episode, though, I want to remind everyone that if you've been enjoying the podcast and the content that I've been putting out, and you want to support the show and the Outdoor Minimalist mission, the Outdoor Minimalist Patreon is launching in 2 weeks on Monday, February 7th. You can get more information about what the patron exclusives are on my website, theoutdoorminimalist.com. And if none of those options really tickle your fancy, then leaving a review on Apple Podcasts is a free way to be supportive of the Outdoor Minimalist mission. Okay, so we've talked about conservation pretty consistently on the show, but this will be a more in-depth look into how one conservation organization is creating a thru-hike, building community, and encouraging conservation action all across the United States. So joining me to discuss these topics, I'm excited to introduce Rue McKenrick. Rue McKenrick is a professional backpacker, triple crowner, and avid hiker. He now calls Bend, Oregon home, but he grew up in Pennsylvania and hiked the Appalachians as a teen. Rue's long-distance backpacking began with the Appalachian Trail in 2003. From there, he took on the Pacific Crest Trail in 2005 and the Continental Divide Trail in 2007, completing the Triple Crown. In 2004, Rue thru-hiked the Pinhotti Trail and the Long Trail, and then onto the John Muir Trail in 2016. Spending yet another time on the Appalachian Trail, he was a ridge runner on the Pennsylvania section in 2008. All of these years and miles of thru-hiking experience have led Rue to follow his heart in embarking on his current journey, creating the American Perimeter Trail. The APT will roughly follow the border of the contiguous United States and cross 32 states, clocking in at about 12,000 miles. Rue left his home in Oregon to begin the first scout hike in July of 2019 and backpacked continuously until his return home for a rest in October of 2020. He will finish the 12,000 miles in 2022. So thank you so much, Rue, for taking the time to be on the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast today. We have a lot to talk about. But first, I want to know a little bit more about how you got into outdoor recreation and how that lasting passion has kind of fueled your career today.
Hi, thank you so very much for having me. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the question. Often I'm asked about a genesis story as far as why have I dedicated my life to conservationism and then done that through my art of backpacking. And I don't have the genesis or the origin story, but what I can tell you is that I had many wonderful experiences on the Appalachian Trail growing up, and living right, a couple hundred yards from the trail, I got to meet a lot of backpackers over the course of the years when I was much younger, and I would always ask them questions, and they would tell me things like, "Oh, we play in the woods, and we're out here every day," and these things were very appealing to me as just someone who was curious, had a curiosity, loved to travel, and a general wonderment about the world. So after becoming an adult, I started long-distance backpacking. I went to school for education, and I worked for a couple different organizations. I served on some boards like Antietam Watershed Association and worked with the Chesapeake Bay Association. Also, I worked for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, also the Appalachian Mountain Club, and I seemingly always had a seasonal job that I worked for a nonprofit. So I was always kind of in the nonprofit sector in one way or another. I was an AmeriCorps volunteer as a young man. I worked for Outward Bound. So that is kind of like, with that experience, it's basically recreation meeting ecology meeting conservationism because I worked for different organizations that represented each one of those as their mission. And so for me, as like a more holistic person in my endeavors, I had the background of the recreation, but then the conservation piece, and also the ecology piece just from my formal education in earth science. And basically, I started viewing many years ago, I always just kind of thought, like, how can I be a part of something bigger than myself? Mm-hmm. How is it that I can do something on this planet with this very finite time that I have? And so I just simply looked towards natural talents that I already possessed. So it wasn't really necessarily about going out and creating a resume building. And I encourage this for everyone who maybe wants to be a part of something bigger than themselves. Access that part of you in which you see that you have a talent or a gift in which to provide, and then follow that to whatever its means. I also like to write, and I like to write music, and I like to write songs. I just happen to be a backpacker, so I'm using that piece in order to move the conservation work ahead. But if I wasn't a backpacker, maybe I would use the music piece to forward some of that work. So for me, it's just kind of like taking a look around and see, what am I good at? And what do I have to offer?
Yeah, no, that is a very diverse work history, I would say. But I definitely identify with that. I feel like I have a similar pursuits in life. But looking at your backpacking specifically, because it seems like you do that somewhat professionally, and I don't necessarily want this to be our whole conversation, but can you give a little more background on your hiking and thru-hiking experience specifically?
Certainly. So I began long distance backpacking or distance backpacking over 20 years ago. I didn't have any plan around it. I still don't. I really just, like I said, growing up off the Appalachian Trail, kind of figured that it was something that I would maybe someday distance hike. I didn't know if I would through hike, which means you hike the entire thing. But I ultimately made a decision to do that. I was a very young man, and I didn't see it as a means to an ends in any kind of way. It really was just a curiosity, an exploration, and a way to travel, and a connection to the greater biosphere that I was living in for those months. After that, I went on to a bunch of other long distance trails, and I kind of really pivoted my life around those journeys for, a decade or more. And so what that meant for me was hiking half the year and maybe working like as many jobs as possible the other part of the year in order to save up a little bit of cash so I could take off. And really, I think it was a pursuit of freedom more than anything else. Then several years after that, I had ended up completing the Triple Crown, which is completion of the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, Continental Divide Trail. And I didn't think my backpacking was going to end there, but I never intended on hiking the Triple Crown. It just kind of happened. And honestly, by the end of that backpacking season and the next couple years, really, I started to wind down my backpacking because it was not feeding me in the way in which it once did. I think John Muir said the rocks no longer speak to me, and it wasn't that I was losing a connection there. I just could not understand why I was there in the first place. So after, like I said, becoming a Triple Crowner, I went on many different trips after that. I worked with a bunch of other organizations and trail organizations after that. But ultimately, my mind came back to the conservation piece and a bigger project for my life's work. And that's how I got to the APT, or the American Perimeter Trail. And that's currently is my hike, and it's also my conservation work. And so I found a way in order to take some talents and some things that I knew I was capable of and kind of move them into the bigger work, which is the conservation piece.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear people's stories as how they got to where they are today, because when you're in the moments, it doesn't always feel cohesive or that it's actually leading to a specific point. And then once you get there and you're going through that transition, then it comes out and it all kind of makes a lot of sense. And so hearing you explain that, it makes a lot of sense how you reached the destination of the APTC.
Oh, great.
I don't know if you're trying to make it that way. But...
No, because these things aren't linear.
Mm-hmm.
They're not linear, and they're not a plan. I mean, you can have a plan, but I think when I was growing up, my mother used to say something like, from your mouth to God's lips, and I don't even really know what that means. But I heard it put another way of something like, that's when God laughs, and it doesn't matter what your views are around that, but the point being is like, when you make large plans, linear plans, and you set yourself up for this track, my hat's off to you if you can maintain it. But my guess is there's probably going to be a number of obstacles in the way. And that certainly has been my path. And I'm better for it now. But I wouldn't necessarily have said that in the moment.
Yes. I identify with that for sure. So since we're kind of talking about the APTC in general, can you explain a little bit more about how creating that trail and also conservation are mixed into that entire conference and what exactly it is?
Great, thank you. So I left Bend, Oregon in July of 2019 to begin hiking the American Perimeter Trail. I estimated it to be around 12,000 miles at the time. I didn't have a route because this is an exploratory process in which if there already was a route that existed, if there was already a trail that existed, I sincerely doubt I would have chosen to backpack the entire thing. The decision to do that has been more of like a holistic approach into the conservation effort that I've begun. So while I was out backpacking, so the conference didn't exist when I left.
Okay.
I simply didn't have the resources. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I mean, I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the people, which is the most important piece. And so I was told at that point in time, just go and you can build it as you go. Well, I wasn't looking forward to trying to take on the longest trail ever and like create the biggest conservation effort ever at the same time while I'm in the backcountry. But that is how this started to happen. And I always knew I was going to form the nonprofit. So ultimately the APT was something I conceived of 10 years before I began the hike. I didn't spend those 10 years planning it. In fact, I didn't really plan it at all because I knew that it wasn't necessary or that it would be fool's errand in my process, that is. And so as I continued on, I sought some help from the front country, people just like taking care of some of the things that were becoming increasingly difficult for me. And before I knew it, we were in a pandemic, and then those sorts of front country tasks became essential to even continuing the project or continuing. And at that point in time, it was the American Perimeter Trail project. So I always knew that this was my baby, but I was going to hand it over to the public. Mm-hmm. That was always my plan. I'm the only one that actually knows the route, so I do have some intellectual property around that, but I am sharing all of this purposefully. So I always knew this was going to be something much bigger than me, that it was going to take way more people than me, and that it was something that would go on way beyond my time here in this physical realm. So I've started to form the conference, and in doing so, I've formed a small board. Mm-hmm. And from there, we're bringing awareness to the APT and what the capacity is there, and see if people wanted to join the community and ultimately became a membership organization. So we do receive annual contributions for annual membership right now. And they're the founding builders of the American Perimeter Trail. I had a huge interest in conservation before this, and often was reading the papers of the Appalachian Trail conference, mm-hmm. and also the Pacific Crest Trail conference at that point in time, and had reviewed their notes and the writings around that. And I would daydream often about being at the conference and being a part of this historical piece, but I just hadn't been born yet. So this was my answer to recreating that and to carry on that sentiment and the spirit of conservationism, which it comes and goes. It's had its heydays. Yeah. But as far as the conference is concerned, our main mission and vision is we are creating a 14,000-mile trail that roughly follows the contiguous lower 48. It's a conservation corridor, not just for recreation, but also for wildlife. And the process right now is just bringing in members or builders in to join it so that we have the kind of talent and people power in order to take on something like this. And then the conference, I'll just share with you, like, for instance, it's National Letter Writing Week. So for this week, one of our focuses is sharing with people and letting them know how they can write letters, what the content of those letters could be for the APT, and where are the appropriate places for those letters to go. So that's kind of more of a political action.
Okay.
And we officially are a conservation organization. That's how we're filed with the IRS. We're not filed as a trail organization, and neither are the other trail organizations. We do conservation, and the way that people become interested in that and have buy-in and ownership is through recreation.
When you're going, I'm going to kind of like go through a couple different sections here that you kind of discussed. So in building the trail itself, I imagine, I haven't hiked these trails, I've hiked parts of the PCT, very small parts. So I've seen parts of it, but I would imagine that the trail in their entirety, no matter the thru-hike, that they have evolved since they were born. And so the American Perimeter Trail, even if it is complete in its phase right now, how do you go about kind of building and solidifying the trail? We talked about it before in our first conversation about how you sometimes had to cross private property or you're on public land. So how do you build a trail, I guess, is this question.
Wonderful. And I mean, I can speak a little bit to how traditionally it's been done, which no longer impacts us or is actually a tool that we would use. But there was a time, and this would have been like over 70 years ago, where there was the use of eminent domain, which is basically where the government says, this land is better for the public good, here's the fair market price, and then you don't really have a say in that. We won't be doing any of that, and actually eminent domain is not something that's used by like trail organizations really anymore. So that's not a process, because I just want to put that out there. That is not part of the process. So if you're thinking like that's kind of how some of this works, I just want the listeners to know that's not part of it. So basically, from its inception, the inception is it comes into my brain. People ask me, how did it get there? Well, I don't know, but it came into my brain. And having that responsibility of that vision or that message that was sent to me, then I simply started sharing that with others to see if other people had the same kind of ideas or mission or vision or what kind of ideas they had around this, not whether or not it was viable. I think in approaching any kind of long trail, starting with the question of whether or not it's possible is not the place where you start. You start at what maybe is possible and then go from there. So if I think about the entire APT and the process that's before me, I get overwhelmed. It'll be enough that I want to quit. But taken piecemeal, it's heavily inspired, but also defined by the region in which it passes. And that is, I think, the greatest gift of the APT, but it's also one of its greatest challenges. And what do I mean by that? Well, in some regions, you're going to have a lot of public land, and in other regions, you have no public land. My process, how I've decided to go about this, and just know if you were on one of the other major trails many years ago, you would have seen a very different kind of trail. In fact, maybe you wouldn't have seen a trail. Maybe it would have been a paved road, or maybe it would have been a fire road, or maybe it would have just been a cross-country section where you have to navigate without trail to get to the next section of trail. And the APT will be no different in that way. So I will make the route more public in this upcoming year. Some of that route will be quality route that can stay. Some of it will need to be built, and then some of it will simply just need to be moved because it's going to have basically what you could call a placeholder. So there's like a dirt road or something that's holding the place as a connector, but it's not, a single track footbed for kind of lesser travel, non-motorized vehicle travel. So at this point in time, one of my main responsibilities is to speak about the APT anytime I get a chance to bring that to a greater audience. I'm building the membership and the organization. I built the board, and I'm increasing that at this point in time. And I'm laying out kind of like the bylaws and also the philosophies in which the APT will roughly follow. Because I'm not the beginning and the end of this. Mm-hmm. When I decided to make this public, I basically handed over all my rights. And I always knew I was going to do that. And it's hard to hand over the baby. It is. but I did. So from here on out, like I said, it's inspired regionally. So if we're looking to share a trail, then I contact that trail organization and see if we can have a partnership where we can use a shared footbed. Okay, some of those partnerships already exist. I haven't made all of them public. One I've talked about a little bit is with the Continental Divide Trail, and we will probably be sharing footbed in northern Montana and also in southern New Mexico of the CDT. So that's the process you would use if there's existing trail, is if you want to have a partnership there. If there is not an existing trail, but there is public land, then what that requires me to do is to do some personal scouting around it, which I've been doing this whole time I've been out there. So basically, where do I think the route and the trail should go? And then that means Reconference having a partnership with land management agencies, like for instance the BLM, the National Park Service, or the National Forest. So that's how that works. Now if it's private land, so like I said, this is heavily inspired by the region. So I'm going to bring up the example of Texas. There is a tremendous amount of open land. There is almost no open public land, a very small percentage. So in that case, then I'm looking to other existing areas where there might be right-of-ways or easements. These include railroads or gas lines, and also we can make agreement with private landholders as well to see if we can get an easement through their land just for the trail to come through. But at this point in time, essentially, I build the conference so that we can start to have our satellites built up around the country, these regional areas where we have people that are responsible. I don't know if I want to use the word responsible, but let's say they have some responsibility for those sections of trail in the region of the country in which they're living, and have maybe not oversight, but just responsibility of reporting back to the oversight. So, have a dream, have a vision, learn more about that vision, which is the scouting route that I'm doing right now. Do your research, make friends, share your ideas, listen to other people's ideas, come up with a route, and then, start the process of contacting everyone along that route, including local municipalities and law enforcement, about what your intentions are, and see if you can get some local buy-in, which we are finding. And that's the way this gets done. Mm-hmm. This doesn't get done from, we're located in Bend, Oregon. I'm the only local member. Everyone else here is all spread out across the country, including the board. But this doesn't get done from the headquarters in Bend, Oregon. This is an American project. This gets done at the local level. That requires me having a lot of connection to all these local regions around the United States. But ultimately, Pennsylvanians are going to build the Pennsylvania Trail. Mm-hmm. Texans are going to build the Texas Trail of the APT. And so my hope is not just that it continues to evolve until we finish, but my intention is that this thing always evolves from here on out. It never has a resting place. It'll get to some kind of threshold or milepost. A lot of the work's been done, and a lot of it is very hikeable or accessible. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, this is something that will be improved on and changed. I'm very curious about how much I will see in my lifetime. Most people that have created trails in this way have not seen all of their work in their lifetime. And so, that's not my goal. My goal is that this doesn't actually need me anymore, Yeah. Actually that it doesn't need me. So I'm not going to orphan the APT, but in a sense, I've been given this gift and I've handed it over, and I'm just so happy that other people are getting to share with me in this dream, really.
Yeah, that is such an interesting process. I feel when I have been hiking or backpacking in the past, I often wonder, like, who is maintaining these trails and who put this trail here in the first place? And sometimes those types of questions probably pop into a lot of people's heads. And so it's really interesting to hear you speak about that entire process, because there is so much going into it and so many different people contributing. And that kind of leads me to the question of, how does conservation tie into all of this? Because obviously you want to be able to use this trail for a very long time. And so is the intention just to conserve the area, the immediate area around the trail, or kind of what is your vision with that aspect?
Let me say this. I receive a lot of criticism from people that ask me why I don't just hike it the way that they would hike it. In other words, take some very defined, heavily used routes, connect them together, call it done, because that's simply not our mission. My goal was never to take on, like I said, just for the sake of hiking the longest trail ever, just so I could say that I did it. We are trying to open up areas for recreation so that they may come into, if they're not in the public sector, that they can be brought into the public sector, or they can be treated with the respect that they deserve, because people are loving and caring for those. So I see to not use necessarily more established routes, but to take the APT to other areas. We see, we're going to hear this a lot over the next couple years about wild areas being loved to death. And unfortunately, some of the areas that often come up in those conversations are part of our national scenic trail system. And so I didn't have any interest in bringing more people outside or bringing more people to already crowded areas. The idea is actually to create the conservation corridor in which people can recreate. But that area, as far as from a conservation perspective, is not a pristine wilderness, because that is a different concept. There's nothing wrong with creating more wildernesses in this country or designating places to that end. But what we're seeking to do is land and resources can be used for any number of purposes. Our belief and view, and my belief and view on it, is that these natural resources aren't something that we can just formulate or make in a lab or make in a factory. These are the process of millions of years of their own development. They produce themselves. Man didn't produce these areas. However, we use them. And so the utility piece of it is, I believe, in some of these areas, that they will better suit the communities that they serve, or the communities that serve them, through a recreation and conservation effort. I also believe that's better for our the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act of the 1970s, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency in the 70s. I believe it's more on the mission with that, where we have healthy air, healthy water, clean air and clean water, healthy biospheres and ecological systems, that there too we can find healthy human beings, and that those two things are not in opposition to each other. Now, of course, this is just a perspective, an opinion that I have. And so I would like to see the corridor of this come into the public sector. I don't believe, and I am not a naysayer, so if someone out there believes differently than me, please have at it. But I don't know that there's going to be the will of the people that if I sell this as a conservation corridor for the contiguous United States, and it's going to be a wildlife corridor, there will be some who will be interested. There will be many who will be interested. If this is an area that people can have ownership and buy-in, because they recreate there, because they love it, because it's a big part of their life, that, I think, is how we get this done. Hence, the American Perimeter Trail.
Yeah, I see the correlation. And it reminds me of, in episode 19 of the podcast, it's not released at the time of this recording, but it will be the episode before yours, we talk a lot about what sectors of the outdoor industry actually contribute to conservation, and a lot of it falling on sportsmen, so hunters and anglers. And so I am interested and also feel very grateful for your organization, but am wondering how a lot of other hiking communities contribute to conservation.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought up recreation outside of hiking and backpacking. So there's no misunderstanding. We are not creating this to make the next longest through hiking route in the world. If people want to go through hike it, my hat is off to you. But we are an organization that is more interested in the greater population. And so that's families. And that's people who either will walk for 5 minutes, or walk for 5 days, or walk for 5 months, or people who simply want to have a picnic at a trailhead, or people who just want to hop out of the car and get their picture taken beside the American Perimeter Trail because it's something that maybe they don't know a lot about, but they have a sense of kind of pride and knowing that they're part of a society that values these things. I cannot speak to how others are participating in the conservation at large. I don't seek out in particular a single kind of group or a single kind of fundraiser. This is what I would say to that, because I do have a consciousness around this. This is often why you'll never hear me speak. I don't want to say never, but you'll rarely ever hear me speak about gear. This is why you rarely hear me speak about the greater outdoor industry, because I want to be speaking about the outdoor industry where I can report back to the world the positive benefits that maybe my organization or others have received from partnering with them. I do personally feel like there is a responsibility there. And I do hold those who provide gear for me, I do hold them to a standard. And my expectation is that if you are going to be encouraging people to go outside and to buy your stuff, that you have a responsibility in part for the use of those resources. And it's as simple as, like, for instance, we'll see in many places around the country where there was like a pristine river that maybe people enjoyed fishing for years, and then it got popular for paddling, which isn't a problem. But if you start having many outfitters on that river, at some point they're starting to take away from the experience of what others, an experience others are trying to have. So how do they compensate, or how do they make up for that? That's a piece of, that's a little bit different about conservation as opposed to environmentalism. I look to hold those companies accountable as I go forward. I'm still professionally backpacking. I will be this spring and summer. So going forth, I want to talk to organizations that are interested in giving contributions. And I'm saying it, contributions, monetary contributions to organizations that they believe in, because they can't do it. So if you're reading something and believing that, like, a manufacturer is doing like conservation work, it's really not what they're doing. And that's kind of like what they're doing is selling a product, okay? So they can help the conservation piece by supporting the efforts of those of us who are out here doing it. And honestly, like, if they're not interested in supporting the nonprofits outside of government agencies that are providing and putting their own time into these recreational opportunities, then they don't really get a place at the table with me. I wanted to speak to the conference as far as where we stand now directly. We are fully a grassroots organization at this point in time. So what does that mean? It just basically means that we receive contributions and efforts from individuals all over, not just this country. We are not receiving our money from corporate donors or sponsors or any other kind of larger entities or organizations, like governmental organizations. So right now, the way that we support the work is through individuals, and the way that we seek talent and get our work done is by the individual working collectively as a community, which is the APT community. So I hope I got to your question in there.
Yeah, no, I think so, yes. That seems like a very intentional approach to make it a grassroots effort, and perhaps it brings a bit more buy-in like you were talking about earlier, so more smaller communities are really wanting to not only contribute monetarily, but also their time in building the trail sections when that needs to happen.
Well, one thing that it brings, Meg, is honesty. Mm-hmm. That's one thing that it brings to the process. I'm asking for a lot from people and from their time and from whatever they can share with us. I'm asking a lot. There's a certain amount of kind of trust that goes along with that. And so, though I'm not representing gear right now, I would hope that in the future, if I was doing that, people would know that that was legitimate. Mm-hmm. And that it wasn't that I'm feeling good because someone's recognized me and now I'm trying to sell their stuff for them. There's a kind of honesty that comes with the relationship between our community and with me and how I communicate with them. And do they believe me? There has to be a certain kind of amount of faith going into this. Now, I think we're over that because there's enough people involved that it doesn't have to be faith in me anymore. But we had to start somewhere. So, and with that being said, I think that's kind of what it brings. It's not a matter of being pure or being a purist, but when I'm giving you my opinion or my thought, you can know that it's coming from a place of my heart or that it's informed by my experience and that it's not informed by someone who prepped me before the interview about my talking points.
Yeah, those types of partnerships, they can give and take. I'll say that much.
Okay.
There can be a level of bias in those types of things. So it makes a lot of sense that you're approaching it in this manner.
Yeah, I don't know how I have any gear sponsors because they provide gear for us. I needed it in order to do this trek. I'm grateful for them. I had my stuff stolen at some point, and they would play. It happened in Michigan, and I appreciate them coming forward and helping me with that process. But I will be done with some of the larger scouting pieces of this soon, and then that's where, as far as the outdoor industry, like, do you want to be in this game of conservationism or do you not? And we'll let that be known publicly, and then people can kind of decide with their wallets. Yeah. How they want to participate that way.
That's a perfect question. Do you want to be a part of conservation or not?
Yeah. Yeah. These are the questions I ask, and so that's why it's like I ask the hard questions and I go in first. That's part of my work here, I don't even want to say my job, but I ask these hard things because I did not put my life on the line and my welfare and my sanity and everything else involved with being a human on this planet to be like wearisome about asking hard questions or having difficult discussions. I didn't come this far to be influenced by greed. So, yeah. And again, I get a lot of criticism for this because it seems taking the hard road or and I don't like saying the high road because I'm not above anyone, but it's seen as like taking some of the hard road, and I just see it as more taking kind of a hard line.
Yeah, having boundaries, I guess.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I love that approach, and I also really appreciate all the efforts for conservation within building of the trail, which is why I was so excited to talk to you on the show. And I guess kind of as a final question, I am wondering how people can learn more about the American Premier Trail, follow along with the progress, and also get involved in their local sector of the trail.
Oh, wonderful. So, as I mentioned before, we have started offering membership. Now, it's some money, and I haven't been able to afford all of my memberships over the years either, okay? So, I've often asked them as Christmas gifts or as birthday presents. Like,
that's a great idea. Yeah.
It's great. It's great. So I'll ask instead of giving me some stuff that like I didn't mention this. I don't really have any possessions, so I'm already like a minimalist in my front country life. Instead of like giving me stuff, it'll be like, can you just renew my membership to XYZ, to whatever organization is that I'm a part of. So I don't always have the money for that. So, I tried to figure out the best way around this. It's $35 annually. I did put something in there on our website. So if you want to pay $6 every 2 months, and if you want to participate and you just don't simply have the funds, it's okay for someone just to contact me and we'll find ways to participate. But certainly you can go onto our website, which is AmericanPerimeterTrail.org, and you can sign up to be a member, or what we call builders there. Also, you can follow us on social media. You'll find a American Perimeter Trail page on Facebook and also a community page on Facebook, which is where you can post instead of so you can post there and then have the community of the APT reflect back whatever they do. And then same with Instagram. We have an American Perimeter Trail page there as well. And of course, you'll see me just as Rue McKenrick on social media, and also www.ruemckenrick.weebly.com. That is me, okay? That is not, it's very difficult to, at this point in time, to like kind of disentangle the APT from me.
Yeah.
And we don't really need to do that right now, but just know like I am a personal person as well. And so like, I'm not always, it feels like I'm always wearing the conference hat. Like even when I'm sleeping, I feel like I'm wearing the executive director hat. But I'm also a person who is not wearing the executive director hat. And I'm also like a pro backpacker. So there's, a couple of different pieces there. And I'm the same person throughout, but I'm not representing all of those same things at once. Right. Like in a professional capacity. So I would hope that people find us there and follow along and take what you like and leave the rest behind. But really at this point in time, if you want to get involved, I would recommend becoming a community member, sending us some information, going on the community page, maybe posting a hello, introducing yourself to the community there. And then also depending on like where you live may be your biggest asset to this whole project. And what I mean by that is maybe you live in an area where the APT might be coming to. Now we have a bunch of members in states and in countries that the APT is not going to. Nonetheless, they're like, they're on board with the work and want to be a part of it. So getting to know your local conservation and also trail organizations is a really great start, especially because I get a lot of contacts from people who there already is an existing trail organization or a semblance of some. Maybe there's not an official nonprofit, but a loose-knit group of people. And there are a lot of people who are already participating in that, and then they're contacting us to ask if we will bring the APT to their area and possibly share their footbed. So it's always great. If you're a person like me, this scouting part of me, look around your neighborhood and your area. And I love this because, like I said, I have people that come to me with ideas as far as the APT. Even though I have a route and maybe their idea is way different than mine, I'm like, that's a really great idea. We should, and we're already, in the moment, we're redrawing the map that we just finished. That's awesome. So that's another great way to participate with this.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of really great opportunity for community involvement, which I think is really important. And I will share all of those links and social handles and everything in the episode notes, so you can check back with that later. But with that, I am really thankful that you had time to come on and share your story about the APT, and I'm excited to follow along with the progress.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, Meg.
So thank you again to Rue and the team at the American Perimeter Trail Conference. I'm excited to follow along with the progress on the trail and to continue to learn more about all of their conservation efforts. So thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Starting Monday, February 7th, new content will begin to appear on the Outdoor Minimalist Patreon. Head over to theoutdoorminimalist.com for more information about our listener support and patron exclusives. You can still find me on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book. Follow there for daily updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.